Welcome to Saga Dream Tales, the place where you can relax, unwind, and drift into calm stories shaped by ancient worlds. Here, every tale moves slowly, carried by soft words and peaceful rhythm, made to ease your mind and guide you into a quiet space. In today's journey, we follow three unusual children born into a world that feared them, children who would shape the very ending and beginning of all things. Their story moves through iron caves and endless oceans, through dark kingdoms and lonely prisons, through the twilight of gods and the dawn of a new world. All you need to do now is sit back, breathe deeply, and let the story unfold at its own slow pace. Close your eyes if you wish, let your body settle into comfort, and allow yourself to be carried away to a time when fate was woven by ancient hands, and three siblings walked separate paths toward the same distant horizon. The journey begins now. In the old times, before the world took its current shape, there lived a being named Loki. He was neither fully god nor fully giant, but something caught between the two. His nature was as shifting as water, as changing as flame, as unpredictable as wind. The gods of Asgard had welcomed him into their golden halls, though they never fully trusted him. Thor called him friend and companion. Odin called him blood brother. But deep in their hearts, they knew that Loki walked his own path, and that path often led to strange and unexpected places. Loki had a wife in Asgard named Sigyn, who was faithful and true. But before his marriage, and sometimes during it, Loki wandered far from the Golden Realm. He traveled to dark forests and deep caves. He visited the land of the giants, where mountains touched the sky and winter never ended. It was in this cold and lonely place that Loki met a giantess named Angrboda. Angrboda lived alone in a cave made of iron. Her name meant the bringer of sorrow, and she was feared by gods and giants alike. She knew magic that others had forgotten. She could see threads of fate that the Norns themselves had not yet woven. Her eyes held the darkness of deep water. Her voice carried the whisper of coming storms. Where others saw only the present moment, Angrboda saw the shape of things to come. Loki was drawn to her mystery. He spent long nights in her iron cave, speaking of secrets and schemes. They shared knowledge that was not meant to be shared. They spoke of the ending of things and the beginning of things. From their union came three children, and these children would shake the very foundations of the 9 worlds. The first child was a daughter. Her name was Hel. From the moment of her birth, Hel was divided. One half of her body was beautiful beyond measure. Her skin on that side glowed with health and youth. Her eyes shone bright as a star. Her hair fell in waves of darkest night, but the other half of her body was dead. The skin there was pale as old bone. It hung loose and cold. That eye saw nothing. That side of her face showed no expression at all. She was life and death joined together in one being. The second child was a son of sorts, though his form was not like any son that had been born before. His name was Jormungandr. He came into the world as a serpent, a snake with scales that gleamed like dark metal. From his first moment, he was hungry. He ate, and with each meal, he grew. His body stretched longer. His coils became thicker. His jaw grew wider. He was born with an endless appetite that could never be satisfied. The third child was also a son. His name was Fenrir. He appeared first as a small wolf pup with soft grey fur. His eyes were amber gold. His paws were oversized, hinting at the size he would someday reach. He made small sounds in the back of his throat. He tumbled and played like any young wolf. But there was something in his gaze, something ancient and knowing, that spoke of a nature far beyond that of an ordinary beast. Angrboda raised these 3 children in her iron cave. She fed them and taught them and protected them from the world outside. She knew what they would become. She had seen it in her visions. She had read it in the patterns of smoke and the flight of ravens. Her children were born for a purpose. They were born to play their parts in the great ending that would someday come. But for now, they were simply her children, and she loved them with a fierce and desperate love. Time passed in the iron cave. Hel grew tall and learned to walk silently. Her living side moved with grace. Her dead side dragged behind. She learned to speak, though her voice came out hollow and strange. She learned to think and feel, though her feelings were complicated by her dual nature. She felt joy and sorrow at the same time. She experienced hope and despair as one emotion. She was never fully one thing or another. Jormungandr continued to grow at an alarming rate. Soon he was too large for the cave. He slithered out into the frozen wilderness of giant land. He coiled around mountains. He stretched across valleys. Still he ate and ate. He devoured whole herds of animals. He swallowed anything that moved. His body grew so long that it seemed to have no end. His scales grew harder than iron. His fangs grew sharp as the finest swords. Fenrir grew as well, but his growth was different. Each day he became larger and stronger. His soft puppy fur gave way to a thick coat of gray and silver. His small teeth became fangs. His gentle paws became weapons. His playful nature began to show hints of something darker. There was a wildness in him that could not be tamed. There was a hunger that was not for food, but for freedom, for running, for the feeling of wind and the taste of prey. The gods in Asgard began to hear rumors of these strange children. Travelers spoke of a girl who was half-caught. Scouts reported a serpent that grew without stopping. Whispers came of a wolf whose howls could be heard across 3 kingdoms. The gods grew worried. They sent messengers to learn more. The messengers returned with troubling news. Odin, the All-Father, the Wise One, the Seeker of Knowledge, became especially concerned. He had sacrificed his eye for wisdom. He had hung from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights to learn the secrets of the rune. He could see further than most. He could understand patterns that others missed. And when he looked toward the future, he saw the shapes of Loki's children looming large. He called a council of the gods. They gathered in Gladsheim, the Hall of Gold, where important matters were discussed. Thor was there with his hammer. Tyr was there with his sword. Freya was there with her knowledge of magic. Heimdall was there with his far-seeing eyes. All the great gods assembled to discuss what should be done about the children of Loki and Angrboda. Odin spoke of what he had seen in his vision. He described how the wolf would one day grow so large that his jaws would span from earth to sky. He explained how the serpent would one day wrap around the entire world. He told them that the girl with the divided face would one day rule over a realm of the dead. The gods listened with heavy heart. They understood that these children represented danger, but they also knew that acting against them might bring about the very fate they hoped to avoid. The gods debated long into the night. Some wanted to destroy the children immediately. Others argued that killing children for crimes they had not yet committed was wrong. Some suggested imprisonment. Others proposed exile. Finally, Odin made his decision. The children would be brought to Asgard. There they could be watched and controlled. Perhaps there they could even be changed from the path that fate had laid out for them. Odin sent his strongest warriors to the Iron Cave. They traveled on horses that could ride through the air. They carried chains made by the finest craftsmen. They approached Angrboda's home with caution and fear. The giantess knew they were coming. She had seen this moment in her visions many years before. She did not fight when they came for her children. She simply held each one close for a final time. She whispered words to them that only they could hear. Then, she let them go. The warriors brought the 3 children back to Asgard. They flew through the sky with their cargo. Hel rode silently, her living eye watching everything, her dead eye seeing nothing. Jormungandr coiled around one of the warriors, his heavy body nearly pulling them from the sky. Fenrir was still small enough to be carried, though even then his weight was more than it should have been for a wolf his size. When they arrived in Asgard, the gods examined these strange beings. They looked at Hel with her divided nature. They studied Jormungandr with his endless coils. They observed Fenrir with his intelligent eyes. Each god proposed a different fate for each child. Odin decided to deal with each child separately. For Hel, he made a choice that surprised many. He gave her a kingdom of her own. He sent her down to the realm beneath the worlds, to the cold and dark place where those who died of sickness or old age would go. This place was also called Hel, named for its new ruler. It was not a place of punishment like some underworlds, but simply a place of rest for those whose lives had ended quietly. Hel traveled down into the depths. She passed through layers of earth and stone. She went deeper than roots grow. She went further than any living being had gone before. Finally, she came to her realm. It was vast and empty. It was cold and silent. It was perfect for someone who was half dead herself. She set about making it her home. She built great halls made of bones and wishes. She created rooms for the countless dead who would someday come. She established rules and order in her kingdom. The living side of her face handled the administrative task. The dead side of her face understood the needs of those who had passed beyond life. She was uniquely suited for this role, this girl who existed between two states of being. With Jormungandr, Odin made a different choice. The serpent was growing too large to keep in Asgard. Even in the short time since his arrival, he had doubled in length. His appetite was becoming problematic. He had eaten several of the golden goats that provided the gods with food. He had tried to swallow one of the smaller whole. Something had to be done before he consumed everything in sight. Odin decided to throw the serpent into the ocean. Not just any ocean, but the great ocean that surrounded Midgard, the world of human. This ocean was vast beyond measure. It circled the entire world. Surely even Jormungandr's endless appetite could not outgrow such a space. The gods carried the serpent to the edge of Asgard. They hurled him down through the air. Jormungandr fell like a dark rope unwinding. He fell past the clouds. He fell past the mountains. He fell until he splashed into the cold water of the world ocean. He sank deep, his body spiraling down into darkness. Then he began to swim. The ocean water was cool and refreshing. The serpent found that he could breathe just as easily in water as in air. He began to explore his new home. He swam around the coast of Midgard. He dove to the bottom where strange fish lived in eternal night. He rose to the surface where waves crashed and storms raged. And he ate. He ate fish and whales. He ate giant squids and schools of herring. He grew and grew. Years passed, and Jormungandr continued to grow. His body stretched longer and longer. He swam further and further. One day, after swimming around the entire world, he encountered his own tail. He had grown so large that he could wrap around all of Midgard. The serpent did what came naturally. He took his own tail in his mouth. Now he formed a perfect circle around the world. He was called the Midgard Serpent, and sailors feared to venture too far from shore lest they encounter his massive coils rising from the deep. That left Fenrir, the wolf. Of the three children, he presented the most difficult problem. He was still young. He was still small enough that the gods thought they might be able to control him. Perhaps he could be raised in Asgard. Perhaps he could be tamed. Perhaps the future that Odin had seen could be changed if they showed the wolf kindness and care. The gods decided to keep Fenrir in Asgard. They built a large pen for him near the Hall of Gladsheim. They gave him food and water. They made sure he was comfortable, but they also made sure he was watched at all times. Guards stood around his pen day and night. The gods took turns checking on him, making sure he had not escaped. At first, Fenrir seemed content with this arrangement. He was fed regularly. He had space to run and play. The gods spoke to him gently. Some even tried to pet him, though his size was already becoming intimidating. He was still young, still more curious and aggressive. He seemed to enjoy the attention he received. But as time passed, Fenrir began to change. He grew larger with each passing day. His shoulders became as high as a horse's back. His paws became as wide as shield. His teeth grew long and sharp. His gentle play became rougher. When he jumped at the gods, he nearly knocked them down. When he bit in play, he left bruises and scratches. More concerning was the way Fenrir looked at the fence around his pen. His intelligent eyes studied it carefully. He paced along its length, testing each post, each board. He was measuring his prison. He was calculating his chances. The gods saw this and became more worried. They reinforced the fence. They made it taller and thicker. They added more guards. But Fenrir kept growing. Soon, he was as large as a horse. Then he was larger than any horse. His head was massive. His shoulders were thick with muscle. When he howled, the sound echoed across all of Asgard. The gods began to fear that they had made a terrible mistake. One god, however, still showed kindness to Fenrir. His name was Tyr. He was the god of war and justice, known for his courage and honor. While other gods began to avoid Fenrir's pen, Tyr continued to visit. He brought the wolf food with his own hands. He spoke to Fenrir in a calm voice. He was not afraid, or if he was, he did not show it. Fenrir grew to trust Tyr. When Tyr approached, the great wolf's tail would wag. He would press his massive head against the fence so Tyr could scratch behind his ears. In these moments, Fenrir seemed less like a monster and more like a very large dog who simply wanted companionship. But these moments became rarer as time passed and Fenrir continued to grow. The other gods pressured Tyr to stop visiting the wolf. They told him it was dangerous. They said he was being foolish. But Tyr believed that if they treated Fenrir with cruelty, they would create the very monster they feared. He believed that kindness might still change the wolf's fate. So he continued his visits, even as Fenrir grew to an enormous size. Meanwhile, in the depths beneath the worlds, Hel was adjusting to her role as ruler of the dead. The first souls began to arrive in her kingdom. They came slowly at first. An old woman who died in her sleep, a farmer who succumbed to illness, a child who never woke from fever. They arrived confused and frightened, uncertain of what came next. Hel greeted each one personally. Her living side showed them compassion. Her dead side understood their transition. She guided them to places where they could rest. She created fields of gray flowers where souls could wander. She made halls where families could reunite. Her realm was not cheerful, but it was not torturous either. It was simply the place where life ended and something else began. As more souls arrived, Hel's kingdom grew. She needed servants to help manage the crowds. She called forth beings from the darkness to assist her. She created rules and systems to keep order. She established boundaries so the dead could not return to the living world. She became efficient and fair in her judgment. Those who came to her realm found that she was neither cruel nor kind, but simply inevitable, like winter, like night. Hel rarely thought of her brothers during those early years. She was too busy with her duties. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between arrivals, she wondered about Jormungandr swimming in the ocean. She wondered about Fenrir growing in his pen. She wondered if they ever thought of her, or of the iron cave where they had been born, or of their mother who had loved them despite knowing what they would become. In the ocean, Jormungandr had no such thought. His mind was simple and focused. He swam and he ate and he grew. He knew the taste of every fish in the sea. He knew the feeling of every current. He knew the shape of every coast. His body was so long now that he could feel storms happening on one side of the world while calm prevailed on the other. He was becoming one with the ocean itself, a living boundary between the sea and everything else. Ships sometimes encountered the Midgard serpent. Sailors would see his coils rise from the water, like dark islands. They would glimpse his scales gleaming beneath the waves. They told stories of the great serpent that circled the world. Some stories were filled with terror. Others were filled with awe. The serpent appeared in their songs and their art. He became a symbol of the ocean's power and mystery. Once, Thor himself went fishing for Jormungandr. The thunder god, always seeking to prove his strength, took a boat far out to sea. He used an ox head as bait, hanging it on a hook attached to the strongest rope in existence. He cast the line deep into the ocean and waited. The serpent, always hungry, smelled the bait. He rose from the depths and swallowed the ox head whole. Thor felt the weight on his line. He pulled with all his godly strength. The serpent pulled back with all his massive weight. The sea churned and foamed. Waves rose as tall as mountains. The boat rocked so violently, it nearly split in two. Thor pulled harder, his muscles bulging, his face red with effort. Slowly, impossibly, he began to pull the serpent upward. Jormungandr's head broke the surface. His eyes, each as large as a shield, stared at Thor with ancient recognition. His mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth like sword blades. Poison dripped from his fangs, hissing where it hit the water. Thor raised his hammer, ready to strike. This was the moment. This was the battle. But the giant who had come with Thor, frightened by what he saw, cut the fishing line. Jormungandr sank back into the depths, the hook still in his jaw. The moment passed. The battle was postponed. Thor raged at the giant for his cowardice, but perhaps it was for the best. The prophecies said that Thor and Jormungandr would one day fight to the death. Perhaps that day should not come until it was meant to come. Back in Asgard, Fenrir had become a serious problem. He was now so large that his pen could barely contain him. He stood taller than any building in the Golden City. His howls shook the walls. When he paced, the ground trembled. The gods held emergency councils to discuss what should be done. They could not kill him. Asgard was a sacred place, and spilling blood there would defile it. They could not release him. He was far too dangerous to roam free. They could not keep him contained much longer. His pen would not hold him for more than a few more weeks. There seemed to be no solution. Then, someone suggested chains. If they could bind Fenrir with chains strong enough, perhaps he could be controlled. The gods agreed this was worth trying. They went to their smiths and ordered the strongest chains ever made. The smiths worked day and night. They forged links of the hardest iron. They created chains that could hold mountains. The gods brought these chains to Fenrir. They needed to convince him to let them put the chains on him. They could not force him, for he was too strong now. So they made it into a game. They challenged the wolf to test his strength. They suggested that he allow them to bind him, just to see if he could break free. After all, if he was as strong as they believed, the chains would pose no threat. Fenrir looked at the chains. He looked at the gods. His intelligent eyes understood that this was not really a game. But he was also proud. He wanted to show his strength, and perhaps a part of him still trusted the gods, especially Tyr, who stood among them. So Fenrir agreed. He stood still while the gods wrapped the enormous chains around his body. The gods stepped back. They told Fenrir to try breaking the chains. The great wolf tensed his muscles. He pulled and strained. The chains creaked. They stretched. Then, with a sound like thunder, they shattered into 1,000 pieces. Fenrir shook himself free and stood proudly. He had proven his strength. The gods pretended to be impressed, but inside they were terrified. They tried again. They made new chains, even stronger than before. They used metal from deep in the mountains. They wove the links with magic. They called these chains Dromi, and they were said to be unbreakable. Again, they approached Fenrir. Again, they challenged him to test his strength. Again, the wolf agreed, though now he was more suspicious. The gods wrapped Dromi around Fenrir. The chains were heavier than before. They bound him tightly. Once again, Fenrir tensed and pulled. This time, it was harder. The chains held for a moment. Fenrir strained and struggled. His muscles bulged. His breathing became labored. But then, with an even louder crack, Dromi broke as well. The gods jumped back as pieces of chain flew in all directions. Now Fenrir knew what the gods were trying to do. He knew they wanted to imprison him. The trust he had built with them began to crumble. He growled low in his throat. His eyes grew cold. The gods backed away slowly. They realized they had perhaps one more chance before Fenrir's patience ran out completely. Odin sent a messenger to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves. These dwarves were master craftsmen who could make impossible things. They had forged Thor's hammer. They had created Odin's spear. Surely they could make something that would hold the great wolf. The messenger explained the situation to the dwarves. He described how Fenrir had broken 2 sets of chain. He conveyed Odin's request for something unbreakable. The dwarves listened carefully. Then, they set to work on their greatest creation. They did not use iron or steel. Instead, they gathered 6 impossible things. They collected the sound of a cat's footsteps, which makes no noise. They gathered the beard of a woman, which does not exist. They found the roots of a mountain, which cannot be seen. They captured the sinews of a bear, which are immensely strong. They added the breath of a fish, which is given in water. Finally, they included the spit of a bird, which is light as air. From these impossible ingredients, the dwarves wove a ribbon. It was thin and soft to the touch. It looked like silk. It seemed delicate enough that a child could break it. But woven into its threads were all the impossibilities of the world. It could not be broken by any force. It could not be cut by any weapon. It could not be loosened by any magic. The dwarves called it Gleipnir, and they sent it back to Asgard with the messenger. When the gods saw Gleipnir, they were doubtful. How could this soft ribbon hold what mighty chains could not? But they trusted in the dwarves' craft. They approached Fenrir for the third time. They showed him the silken ribbon. They made the same challenge as before. Fenrir looked at Gleipnir. His eyes narrowed. The ribbon looked weak, but something about it troubled him. It did not look natural. It did not smell right. He had learned from the previous chain. He was not going to be fooled again. He told the gods that he would not allow them to bind him with this ribbon unless one of them placed their hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. If the ribbon was truly harmless, as they claimed, they should not fear to make this pledge. The gods looked at each other. None of them wanted to put their hand in Fenrir's mouth. They all knew what would happen if the ribbon held and Fenrir felt betrayed. They stood silent, each hoping another would volunteer. The moment stretched on. Fenrir waited, his great jaws slightly open, his eyes moving from god to god. Finally, Tyr stepped forward. He was the only one who had continued to show Fenrir kindness. He was the god of honor and courage. He could not let the others see him as a coward. And perhaps he felt he owed Fenrir this much, after the wolf had trusted him all these years. Tyr walked up to Fenrir and slowly placed his right hand into the wolf's mouth. Fenrir felt Tyr's hand against his tongue. He felt the steady pulse of the god's heartbeat through his wrist. He looked into Tyr's eyes and saw sadness there. The wolf understood in that moment that he was truly about to be betrayed. But he also understood that he had no choice. If he refused this test, the gods would know he was afraid. His pride would not allow that. So he stood still and let them wrap Gleipnir around his body. The gods tied the ribbon carefully. They wound it around Fenrir's legs and body. It felt light as air. It looked like it would snap with the smallest movement. The gods stepped back. They told Fenrir to break free. The great wolf tensed. He pulled. He strained. But the ribbon did not break. He pulled harder. The ribbon held. He thrashed and twisted. Still it held. Fenrir realized he had been trapped. Rage filled him. The gods had lied to him. They had used his pride and his trust against him. He looked at Tyr, whose hand was still in his mouth. Their eyes met one final time. Then Fenrir bit down with all his strength. Tyr's hand was severed cleanly. The god stumbled back, blood streaming from his wrist. He did not cry out. He simply held the wound closed and watched as the other gods secured Fenrir. They tied Gleipnir to a great stone called Gjall. They drove Gjall deep into the earth. Then they took another boulder called Fiti and placed it on top to weight everything down. Fenrir could not move. He could barely breathe. The wolf howled in rage and pain. He thrashed against his bonds. Foam flew from his mouth. The gods worried that he might bite them, so they took a sword and propped it in his jaws. The hilt rested against his lower jaw. The point pressed against his upper jaw. His mouth was forced open. Drool and foam ran from his mouth like a river. He could not close his jaws. He could not speak. He could only lie there, bound and helpless, rage burning in his golden eyes. Tyr wrapped his stump and walked away. He did not look back at the wolf. The cost of his honor was his hand, but he had done what needed to be done. Or so he told himself. In the quiet moments that followed, when he was alone with his wound, Tyr wondered if they had made the right choice. By binding Fenrir, had they created the very monster they feared? By betraying his trust, had they guaranteed he would become their enemy? The gods left Fenrir alone in that place. It was far from the golden halls of Asgard, in a desolate region where none would hear his howl. They told themselves they had done what was necessary. They told themselves the prophecies could still be averted, but in their hearts, they knew they had made an enemy, and that enemy would not forget. Time passed differently for the three children now. Hel continued her work in the underworld. She welcomed the dead and gave them rest. Her kingdom grew vast and orderly. She rarely thought of the world above. She had found her purpose. She had found her place. The division in her nature made her perfect for this role. She was comfortable existing between states of being. Jormungandr continued to swim and eat and grow in the ocean. He had become so large that his existence affected the tide. When he shifted his weight, waves crashed on distant shores. When he dove deep, whirlpools formed above him. He was a force of nature now, more than just a creature. He did not think about the past or a future. He simply existed, eternal and unchanging, circling the world. But Fenrir remembered everything. He lay bound in the wilderness, unable to move, unable to close his mouth. The sword between his jaws caused him constant pain. The ribbon around his body prevented any comfort. He could not sleep properly. He could not hunt. He could only lie there and think about what had been done to him. The wolf thought about his childhood in the Iron Cave, with his mother. He remembered feeling safe and loved. He thought about his early days in Asgard, when he had been treated with kindness. He remembered Tyr bringing him food, scratching behind his ears, speaking to him gently. He thought about how that trust had been broken. He thought about the betrayal. But most of all, Fenrir thought about the future. He knew the prophecies just as well as Odin did. He knew what was meant to happen. He knew that one day his bonds would break. He knew that one day he would be free. And when that day came, there would be a reckoning. The gods had created their enemy. They had made certain that when he finally broke free, his rage would be unstoppable. Years turned to decades. Decades turned to centuries. The world continued as it always had. Humans lived and died in Midgard. The gods ruled from Asgard. The giants plotted in their mountains. The dwarves forged in their underground halls. Life went on. But beneath it all, things were slowly changing. Hell's realm continued to fill with souls. Every day brought more dead. Every night brought more arrivals. The goddess of death grew accustomed to the endless parade of mortality. She saw every kind of person. She saw the good and the evil. She saw the brave and the cowardly. She saw those who died peacefully and those who died in terrible ways. She judged none of them. She simply gave them all the same rest. Over the centuries, hell began to change. Her living side became harder, more distant. Her dead side became more aware, more perceptive. The two halves of her began to work together more smoothly. She developed a reputation among both the living and the dead. She was fair, but cold. She was just but unfeeling. She was inevitable. The gods rarely visited her realm. They did not like to think about death. They were mighty and immortal, or so they believed. Why should they concern themselves with the fate of mortals? Only Odin came occasionally, seeking wisdom from the dead. Only he would descend into Hell's dark kingdom to speak with those who had passed beyond life. Hel always received him politely, but never warmly. She had not forgiven the gods for what they had done to her family. In the ocean, Jormungandr had grown so large that he was now part of the world's geography. Sea maps showed his coils. Sailors learned to recognize the patterns of his movement. When the serpent stirred, storms arose. When he was still, the seas were calm. He had become a barometer for the ocean's mood. There were those who worshipped the Midgard serpent. Coastal villages made offerings to him. They threw food and treasures into the sea, hoping to appease him. They prayed that his coils would not rise near their shore. They told stories of his power. In this way, Jormungandr became a god of sorts, though he neither knew nor cared about the worship. Deep beneath the waves, the serpent dreamed simple dreams. He dreamed of swimming forever. He dreamed of the taste of whales. He dreamed of the cool darkness of the deep ocean. He did not dream of revenge. He did not dream of his family. He had become something elemental, something beyond personal concerns. He was the ocean's guardian and prisoner both. But Fenrir, still bound in the wilderness, did nothing but dream of revenge. With each passing year, his hatred grew stronger. His rage burned hotter. The gods checked on him occasionally, always from a safe distance. They saw him lying there, the sword in his mouth, the ribbon around his body. They congratulated themselves on their cleverness. They told themselves they had avoided the prophecy. They did not see the fire burning in the wolf's eyes. Loki, the father of these 3 children, watched it all with mixed feelings. He had not been there when his children were taken. He had not protested when they were scattered across the 9 worlds. Some said he did not care. Some said he was afraid to show that he cared. But in truth, Loki felt the weight of what had been done to his offspring. He visited Fenrir sometimes, though not often enough to draw suspicion. He would stand at the edge of the clearing where the wolf was bound. He would look at his son, unable to move, unable to speak. Loki would feel guilt and anger in equal measure. But he never freed Fenrir. He knew that doing so would bring down the wrath of all the gods upon himself. He was not ready for that. Not yet. Loki also knew the prophecies. He knew what was coming. He knew that one day, all of this would lead to Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, the end of everything. He knew his children would play central roles in that ending. And perhaps, in some dark corner of his complicated heart, he looked forward to it. The gods had never fully accepted him. They had used him when convenient and scorned him when not. Perhaps they deserved what was coming. As more time passed, the world began to show signs of change. Winters grew longer. Summers grew shorter. The sun seemed dimmer. The stars seemed colder. These changes were subtle at first. Most people did not notice them. But those who were old enough to remember said that the world was not as it once was. Something was ending. Something new was beginning. The gods noticed these changes too. They consulted the Norns, the 3 women who wove the threads of fate. They asked what these signs meant. The Norns would not answer directly. They simply continued their weaving, their ancient faces showing no emotion. But their silence was answer enough. The fate they had been weaving all along was coming to pass. Odin increased his efforts to learn everything he could. He traveled to distant realms seeking wisdom. He spoke with giants and elves. He consulted spirits and ghosts. He studied runes and practiced magic. He was trying to find a way to prevent what was coming. He was trying to change the story that had already been written. But everything he learned only confirmed what he already knew. The ending could not be stopped. In preparation for what was to come, Odin began gathering the greatest warriors who died in battle. He sent his Valkyries, warrior women who could fly, to the battlefields of Midgard. They would choose the bravest of the slain and bring them to Asgard. These warriors were called the Einherjar. They would feast and fight in Valhalla, Odin's great hall, training for the final battle that would one day come. The Valkyries flew over countless battlefields. They watched men fight and die. They selected only the finest warriors, those who showed no fear in the face of death. These chosen warriors woke in Valhalla, confused at first, then honored to be selected. They spent their days fighting each other in the courtyard. Each night, no matter how badly they were injured, they would heal and feast together. They were building an army for Odin, though most did not know what they were being prepared for. Hel watched this process with interest. She saw the Valkyries pass over certain battlefields, collecting the heroes. She received the rest of the dead from these same battles. The common soldiers came to her realm. The farmers and merchants who died came to her. She welcomed them all without judgment. In a way, she was building an army too, though hers was an army of the forgotten, the ordinary, the peaceful dead. Sometimes Hel wondered what would happen when the final day came. Would her dead rise? Would they play a part in the ending? The prophecies were unclear on this point. She knew that a ship made of the fingernails of dead men would sail in the last battle. She knew that her realm would send forth forces when the time came. But she did not know exactly what her role would be. She simply continued her work and waited. In the ocean, Jormungandr felt the changes too, though he could not have named them. The water grew colder. The currents shifted. Strange new creatures appeared in the depths, things that had never existed before. The serpent ate them without thought, but somewhere in his ancient mind, he sensed that the world was preparing for something. Sailors reported stranger and stranger sightings. They saw Jormungandr's coils, thrashing in waters that had always been calm. They saw his head rise from the depths more frequently. They saw foam and waves where none should be. The sea was becoming more violent, more unpredictable. People began to fear traveling by water. Trade decreased. Communities became isolated. The ocean, which had always connected the world, was becoming a barrier. Fenrir felt the changes most acutely of all. The seasons in his wilderness prison grew more extreme. Winter snows piled deeper than ever before. Summer heat beat down more fiercely. The trees around him began to die. The animals disappeared. The land itself seemed to be failing. And through it all, Fenrir lay bound, unable to do anything but observe and remember and wait. His waiting was not passive. Every day, Fenrir tested his bonds. He would tense his muscles against Gleipnir. He would pull and strain. The ribbon never broke, but he felt it sometimes. He felt the magic in it. He studied it with his senses. He learned its nature. He was a patient creature when he needed to be. He had all the time in the world. Eventually, he would find its weakness. The gods noticed that Fenrir had stopped howling. For years he had filled the air with his rage. His howls had echoed across the 9 worlds. But now he was silent. Some gods thought this meant he had accepted his fate. They thought his spirit had been broken. But Odin knew better. Odin understood that a silent enemy was more dangerous than a loud one. Fenrir's silence meant he was thinking, planning, waiting. Years continued to pass. The world grew older. The changes became more pronounced. There came a winter that lasted 3 years without summer. Snow fell constantly. The sun barely rose above the horizon. People burned all their wood trying to stay warm. Animals died by the thousands. Communities that had existed for centuries were abandoned. People called this the Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter, the winter that would never end. During this terrible winter, something else began to happen. The bonds between people weakened. Brothers fought brothers. Parents abandoned children. All trust and love seemed to drain from the world. It was as if the cold had frozen not just the land, but the hearts of all living things. Violence spread. War became constant. The world descended into chaos. In the underworld, hell watched as the dead arrived in unprecedented numbers. Hundreds came each day, then thousands. Her realm swelled with the newly deceased. She worked tirelessly to receive them all, to give them places to rest. Her assistants, the beings of darkness she had called forth, worked alongside her. The halls of the dead expanded constantly to accommodate the masses. Some of the dead came with stories of monsters. They spoke of wolves that had grown large as houses, hunting in packs. They told of trolls and giants emerging from their hidden places, attacking settlement. They described the sun and moon growing dimmer, as if something was devouring them. Hell listened to these stories and understood. The end was beginning. In the sky above Midgard, 2 wolves had indeed been pursuing the sun and moon since the beginning of time. Their names were Skoll and Hati. They had always chased the celestial bodies across the sky, getting close, but never quite catching them. But during the Fimbulwinter, their pursuit intensified. They ran faster. They came closer. The sun and moon fled in terror, but they were growing tired. One day, Skoll finally caught the sun. His jaws closed around it. Darkness fell across the world. People screamed in terror. Then Hati caught the moon. The last light disappeared. The world was plunged into absolute darkness. Stars began to fall from the sky like rain. The careful order of the heavens collapsed. Day and night lost all meaning. In the darkness, earthquakes began. The ground shook violently. Mountains crumbled. The world tree, Yggdrasil, which connected all the 9 worlds, trembled to its roots. In Asgard, the gods felt the shaking and knew what it meant. The time had come. All their preparations, all their precautions, all their efforts to prevent this day had failed. Ragnarok was beginning. Deep in the ocean, Jormungandr felt the earthquakes through the water. He felt the world tree shake. And for the first time in his long existence, he let go of his tail. He released his grip on himself. His massive body began to uncoil. He started to move toward land. Waves larger than mountains rose from his movement. Coastal cities were swallowed by the sea. The ocean rose up and covered the land as the Midgard serpent emerged from his ancient home. On land, in his prison, Fenrir felt the earthquakes too. He felt the world trees shake. He felt magic weakening all around him. And in that moment of cosmic upheaval, he pulled against Gleipnir with all his strength one more time. The ribbon that had held him for so long, woven from impossible things, finally met something more impossible: the breaking of the world itself. Gleipnir snapped. Fenrir rose to his feet for the first time in centuries. He was enormous beyond measure. His head reached toward the sky. His paws were as large as hills. The sword that had been in his mouth fell away. He closed his jaws for the first time in so long. Then he opened them wide and howled. The sound shattered what remained of the ice. It cracked the stones. It announced to all the 9 worlds that he was free. The great wolf began to run. His rage, stored for so many years, finally had an outlet. He ran toward Asgard. He ran toward the gods who had bound him. He ran toward his destiny. His eyes blazed with fire. Smoke came from his nostrils. The ground burned where his paws touched it. He was death and vengeance given form. He was the nightmare of the gods made real. In her realm, Hel received a message from Loki. Her father was calling for her. The time had come for her to play her part. She looked around her vast kingdom, at the countless dead who filled her halls. Then she made her choice. She called forth an army. The dead began to rise. Not all of them, but many. Those who had died in dishonor. Those who had died in sickness. Those who had died forgotten. They formed ranks behind their queen. Hel also prepared a ship. This was the ship Naglfar, built from the fingernails and toenails of dead men. It was a horrible vessel, gray and wrong. It should not have been able to float, but it did. Hel boarded this ship along with her army of the dead. The ship sailed upward through the layers of the earth, emerging into the dark world above. She steered it toward where the final battle would take place. Loki had been imprisoned by the gods years earlier for his tricks and crime. They had bound him beneath the earth with the entrails of his own son. They had placed a serpent above him that dripped poison onto his face. His wife Sigyn had sat beside him, catching the poison in a bowl. But when she turned to empty the bowl, drops would fall on Loki, and his thrashing in pain caused earthquakes. Now, with the world ending, his bonds broke as well. Loki emerged from his prison changed. The poison had scarred him. The years of torture had twisted him. Whatever love he once had for the gods was gone completely. He went to his daughter Hel's ship and took command. He would lead the forces of chaos against the gods of order. He would see his children's revenge fulfilled. The trickster had become the destroyer. The giants heard the call to battle as well. They had waited for this moment since the beginning of time. They gathered their weapons and began marching toward Asgard. Fire giants from Muspelheim, led by Surtur with his flaming sword, came from the south. Frost giants from Jotunheim came from the east. They were countless as stars. They were terrible to behold. The earth itself groaned under their weight. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, stood at the Bifrost bridge that connected Midgard to Asgard. He had the sharpest eyes and ears of all being. He could hear grass growing. He could see for hundreds of miles. Now he saw the armies approaching. He saw Fenrir running with jaws open wide. He saw Jormungandr rising from the sea. He saw the ship Naglfar sailing with its crew of the dead. He saw the giants marching. He raised his horn Galahorn to his lips and blew. The sound of Galahorn rang through all the 9 worlds. It was the signal every god had dreaded. It was the call to the final battle. In Valhalla, the Einherjar grabbed their weapons. In Asgard, the gods armed themselves. They had prepared for this moment, but now that it had come, they felt fear in their heart. They knew how this story ended. The prophecies had told them, but they were gods. They would not go down without a fight. Odin donned his golden armor. He took up his spear Gungnir, which never missed its target. He mounted his 8-legged horse Sleipnir. He looked around at his fellow gods. Thor with his hammer, Tyr with his sword, though missing his hand, Freyr with his magical blade, Freya with her warrior spirit. All the gods of Asgard stood ready. They rode out to face their doom. The two armies met on a vast plain called Vigrid. It stretched as far as the eye could see in all directions. On one side stood the gods and their allies, the Inhajar, the elves, the light beings of creation. On the other side stood the forces of chaos, giants, monsters, the dead, and the three children of Loki. Between them lay only empty air and destiny. For a moment, both sides were still. They looked at each other across the plain. Gods faced the children they had scattered and bound. Fenrir's eyes found Odin. Jormungandra's gaze found Thor. Hel looked upon all the gods who had cast her into darkness. This was the moment that had been coming since the beginning of time. This was the purpose for which Loki's children had been born. Then Surtur raised his flaming sword. Loki gave a command. Fenrir howled. And the battle began. The clash was like the ending of the world, which indeed it was. Gods fought giants. Warriors fought the dead. Magic flew through the air like lightning. The sound of weapons and screams filled the darkness. The plain of Vigrid became a place of absolute chaos. Odin rode straight for Fenrir. The All-Father and the Great Wolf had been destined for this meeting. Odin attacked with his spear, striking again and again. Fenrir dodged and weaved, his massive size making him seem slow, but his movements were quick as thought. The wolf's jaws snapped shut near Odin's head. The god barely dodged in time. They fought across the battlefield, leaving destruction in their wake. Odin used all his wisdom and magic. He called upon every spell he knew. He fought with the skill of the greatest warrior, but Fenrir had waited so long for this moment. His rage gave him strength beyond measure. His jaws opened wider and wider, until the lower jaw touched the earth, and the upper jaw touched the sky. In one terrible moment, Fenrir lunged forward. His jaws closed around Odin. The All-Father, the Wise One, the King of the Gods, was swallowed whole. The prophecy was fulfilled. Fenrir stood victorious. But his victory was short. Odin's son Vidar, the silent god, came forward. He wore a shoe made from all the leather scraps that had been collected since the beginning of time. He stepped on Fenrir's lower jaw with this shoe. Then he reached up and grabbed the upper jaw. With a mighty pull, he tore Fenrir's head apart. The great wolf fell. He had achieved his vengeance, but it had cost him everything. As he died, perhaps he thought of the iron cave where he was born. Perhaps he thought of Tyr, who had once been kind to him. Perhaps he thought of his mother. Or perhaps he thought of nothing at all. Fenrir's eyes closed for the last time. Nearby, another prophesied battle was taking place. Thor had found Jormungandr. The thunder god and the serpent had met twice before, but this would be their final meeting. Thor swung his hammer Mjolnir with all his godly might. The hammer struck Jormungandra's head with a sound like worlds colliding. The serpent's skull cracked. Poison blood sprayed everywhere. But even as he died, Jormungandr managed one final act. He exhaled a breath of pure venom. The poison cloud enveloped Thor. The thunder god tried to walk away from his victory, but he had been too badly poisoned. He took 9 steps. Then he fell. God and serpent lay dead near each other. Their final battle ended in mutual destruction. Loki and Heimdall, who had always been enemies, found each other on the battlefield. They fought with weapons, and then with magic, and finally, with their bare hands. They were evenly matched. Neither could gain advantage. They rolled across the ground, each trying to strangle the other. In the end, they killed each other at the same moment. Both died with their hands at the other's throat. Tyr faced off against Garm, a great hound that had been chained in the underworld. The one-handed god fought bravely, but Garm was a fierce opponent. They slew each other. Tyr fell with the hound's jaws around his throat. Perhaps as he died, he thought of the day he had put his hand in Fenrir's mouth. Perhaps he wondered if his sacrifice had been worth it. The world would never know. Freya fought against Surtur, the fire giant. It was a noble effort, but Freyr had given away his magical sword long ago for love. Without it, he could not stand against Surtur's flaming blade. Freya fell. Surtur stood victorious. Then the fire giant raised his sword high and brought it down upon the world itself. Flames erupted across Vigrid. They spread outward in all directions. The world tree Yggdrasil caught fire. Its great branches burned. Its roots were consumed. The tree that held the 9 worlds together began to collapse. As it fell, the worlds themselves began to fall apart. Fire spread across Midgard. Forests burned. Cities burned. Mountains melted. The oceans boiled away. Everything that humans had ever built, everything they had ever known, was consumed by flame. The few survivors who had hidden during the battle emerged to see their world ending in fire. They could do nothing but watch. Asgard burned. The golden halls melted. The beautiful palaces collapsed. All the glory of the gods was reduced to ash and smoke. Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, shattered into colored fragments that fell into the void. The realm of the gods ceased to exist. One by one, the 9 worlds burned. The dark elf realm burned. The light elf realm burned. The dwarf realm deep underground filled with smoke and heat. The giant realms, already homes to fire and ice, were consumed by flames that were hotter than even they could withstand. Everything was being unmade. In her realm of the dead, Hel watched as fire came even there. Her dark kingdom, which had stood beyond life, was now being destroyed. The dead who had remained behind cowered in the halls. She stood calmly as the flames approached. She had done her part. She had led her army to the final battle. She had fulfilled her destiny. Now she would rest, as she had never been able to rest before. The fire consumed Hel's realm. It consumed Hel herself, the girl who had been divided between life and death. As the flames took her, perhaps her 2 halves finally became whole. Perhaps in destruction she found the unity that had eluded her in existence. The goddess of death died, and death itself became uncertain. When the flames finally died down, nothing remained. The 9 worlds were gone. The world tree was gone. The gods were gone. The giants were gone. The elves and dwarves were gone. The monsters were gone. Loki's 3 children were gone. Everything had returned to the void from which it had come. There was only darkness and silence. The darkness lasted for a long time. It lasted so long that time itself lost meaning. There was nothing to mark the passage of moment. There was nothing to separate one instance from another. There was only the void, patient and empty, waiting. But nothing lasts forever. Not even nothing itself. Slowly, gradually, something began to change in the darkness. A tiny spark appeared. It was not fire. It was something else. It was the possibility of existence. The spark grew. It became a glow. The glow became a light. From the light came water. From the water came land. A new earth rose from the sea. It was green and beautiful. It was unmarked by war or fire. It was fresh and clean, ready for a new beginning. Grass grew on this new earth. Trees sprouted. Flowers bloomed. Life began again. 2 humans had survived the destruction. They had hidden in a grove of trees that somehow was not consumed by Surtur's fire. Their names were Life and Liftreisir, which meant life and eager for life. They emerged into this new world. They looked around in wonder. They were alone, but they had each other. From them would come a new human race. A few gods had survived as well. Some of Odin's sons lived. Some of Thor's children lived. They climbed up from wherever they had sheltered during the destruction. They found themselves in this new world. They gathered together and began to tell stories. They told of the old world. They told of the gods who had died. They told of the great battle. These stories would be remembered. Among the stories they told were tales of 3 unusual children. They spoke of Hel, who ruled the dead with fairness. They spoke of Jormungandr, who circled the world. They spoke of Fenrir, who had been betrayed and bound. These 3 children of Loki became legend. They became symbols. People would tell their stories forever, but the actual children were gone. Fenrir's mighty body had been consumed by fire. Jormungandr's coils had melted in the heat. Hel's realm had collapsed into nothing. They had played their parts in the great ending. They had fulfilled the destinies that had been laid out for them before their births. Now, they rested in whatever place spirits go when the world itself ends. In the new world, the survivors made new rules. They decided to live differently than their ancestors had lived. They would not bind what should be free. They would not scatter families out of fear. They would not create enemies through their own actions. They had learned from the mistakes of the old gods. They would try to do better. The sun and moon were freed from the wolves that had devoured them. New celestial bodies took their places in the sky. A new sun rose over the new earth. It was warm and bright. A new moon followed the sun across the sky. It was gentle and cool. Day and night returned to the world. Seasons began their cycle once more. Order was restored, but it was a different kind of order. The new gods found some remnants of the old world. They found Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, lying in the grass. They found other artifacts and treasures. These things became relics, reminders of what had been. They were treated with respect, but not with worship. The old world was gone. This was a new beginning. Time passed in this new world. Generations came and went. The humans who descended from Life and Lithrasir spread across the earth. They built new settlements. They planted new crops. They raised new families. They created new stories and new tradition. But they always remembered the old tales that the surviving gods had told them. They remembered the story of how the world had ended and begun again. They remembered the names of the old gods. They remembered the great battle on Vigrid Plain. And they remembered the 3 unusual children whose existence had been both a curse and a necessity. Without Loki's children, perhaps the old world could have continued forever. But perhaps it needed to end, so this new, better world could begin. In this way, Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir became part of something larger than themselves. Their story became a lesson. It taught that fear and mistrust create the very dangers they seek to prevent. It showed that treating others with cruelty will always come back to haunt you. It demonstrated that destiny is not set in stone, but is shaped by the choices people make. The story taught that when you take a child and cast her into darkness, you should not be surprised when she becomes a queen of shadow. When you throw a child into the ocean to be rid of him, you should not be surprised when he grows to encircle the world. When you bind a child with trickery and betrayal, you should not be surprised when he breaks free with rage and vengeance. The gods had created their own doom through their fear. But the story also taught about love and loyalty. It showed how Angrboda had loved her strange children, despite knowing what they would become. It demonstrated how Tyr had shown kindness to Fenrir, even at the cost of his hand. It revealed how Sigyn had stayed beside Loki through his imprisonment, catching poison for him day after day. These acts of love did not change the ending, but they mattered nonetheless. The new world continued to grow and flourish. More time passed. The survivors who had seen the old world eventually died. Their children died. Their grandchildren died. Generations removed from the destruction came into being. To them, the old world was pure legend. They could not truly imagine it, but they still told the stories. They passed them down through the ages. As centuries turned to millennia, the stories changed as stories do. Details were added. Details were lost. Different people told the tales in different ways, but the core remained the same. There had been 3 unusual children. They had been separated and imprisoned out of fear. They had broken free and helped bring about the end of the world. Then a new world had begun. Some people in the new world said that the 3 children were evil from birth. They said that binding Fenrir and casting out his siblings was the right choice. They said the gods had done what was necessary. Other people disagreed. They said the children had been innocent until they were made into monsters. They said the gods had brought destruction upon themselves. The debate continued for generations, as philosophical debates do. But perhaps the truth was more complicated than either side wanted to admit. Perhaps Fenrir would have been dangerous even if treated well, for his nature was that of a mighty predator. Perhaps Jormungandr would have grown to his enormous size no matter where he lived, for growth was written into his being. Perhaps Hel was always meant to rule the dead, for she understood death in a way no one else could. Perhaps the gods' actions hastened the inevitable, rather than creating it from nothing. Or perhaps not. Perhaps if the gods had welcomed Hel into Asgard, she could have been their advisor on matters of mortality. Perhaps if they had found a way to limit Jormungandr's growth through magic, rather than exile, he could have been a guardian rather than a threat. Perhaps if they had raised Fenrir with love instead of fear, he could have been their greatest defender rather than their destroyer. No one would ever know for certain. What was certain was that fear is a powerful force. It can make people do terrible things. It can turn potential friends into definite enemies. It can create the very futures it seeks to avoid. The old gods had feared Loki's children, and that fear had destroyed them. This was the lesson the New World needed to remember. The new gods in the New World tried to remember this lesson. When something unusual was born, they did not immediately fear it. When someone seemed different, they did not cast them out. They tried to meet strangeness with curiosity rather than suspicion. They tried to treat others as they wished to be treated themselves. They did not always succeed, for fear is a hard habit to break. But they tried. As the New World matured, it developed its own problems and challenges. There were still conflicts and wars. There was still suffering and injustice. The ending of the Old World had not created paradise. It had simply created a new chance. What the inhabitants of this world did with that chance was up to them. The slate had been wiped clean, but it would be marked again soon enough. Yet, there was something different about this new world. There was a sense that things did not have to end the same way twice. The cycle had been broken. Yes, the world had been destroyed and remade, but the new world did not have to follow the same path as the old. The prophecies of the old world had been fulfilled. New prophecies, if they existed, had not yet been spoken. The future was uncertain, and uncertainty meant possibility. In the quiet moments of this new world, when the wind blew through the fresh grass and the new sun warmed the earth, it was possible to imagine that somewhere, somehow, the spirits of Loki's 3 children were at peace. They had been born into an impossible situation. They had been given natures that were difficult to control. They had been feared and hated and imprisoned. They had responded with exactly the destruction that had been predicted of them. But now their task was complete. They had played their part in the great cycle. They had brought down the old order so a new order could rise. In doing so, they had freed themselves from the burdens they had carried. Fenrir no longer needed to rage against his bonds, for all bonds had been burned away. Jormungandr no longer needed to circle the world endlessly, for that world no longer existed. Hel no longer needed to receive the constant stream of the dead, for death itself had been remade. Perhaps in whatever realm spirits inhabit after the ending of everything, the 3 children had finally reunited. Perhaps they met their mother Angrboda there, who had loved them despite knowing their fate. Perhaps they were together in a place where divided natures and dangerous sizes and terrible destinies did not matter. Perhaps they found the peace that had been denied to them in life. Or perhaps they simply ceased to exist, which might have been a kind of peace as well. After all, existence had been difficult for all 3 of them. Hel had been divided against herself. Jormungandr had been driven by endless hunger. Fenrir had been imprisoned and betrayed. If their spirits dissolved into nothing when the world ended, that might have been a mercy. They would no longer need to struggle with what they were. They could simply rest in non-existence. The people of the New World sometimes wondered about these things. They told the stories and debated the meaning. They created art depicting the 3 unusual children. They wrote songs about the great battle. They used these stories to teach their own children about fear and trust, about destiny and choice, about endings and beginning. The tale of Loki's children became woven into the fabric of the New World, even though the children themselves were gone. And so time continued to pass. The New World grew older. It developed its own history. New stories were created to sit alongside the old ones. New heroes arose. New challenges appeared. New gods and goddesses, or at least new powerful beings, emerged to guide and sometimes misguide the inhabitants of this world. Life continued, because life always continues, even after the end of everything. The story of Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir became one story among many. It was not forgotten, But neither was it the only story told. It took its place in a rich tradition of tales about the old world and the time of gods and giants. Children heard it at bedtime. Scholars studied it in great halls of learning. Artists interpreted it in countless ways. It became part of the foundation upon which the new world built its understanding of itself. In this way, Loki's 3 children achieved a kind of immortality. Their physical forms were destroyed in the fire that ended the world. Their spirits, if they had such things, passed beyond the reach of the living. But their story survived. It survived the ending of everything. It survived in the memories of the gods who witnessed it. It survived in the tales passed down through generations. It survived in the lessons learned from their tragic lives. The tale reminded people that those who are different should not be automatically feared. It warned against creating enemies through your own action. It showed that prophecies can be self-fulfilling when people act to prevent them. It demonstrated that even those born for destruction are capable of love and loyalty. It taught that the way you treat others, especially the powerless, matters more than you might think. These were important lessons. They were lessons that needed to be learned over and over again, for each new generation would face their own fears and prejudices. Each new generation would need to decide whether to meet difference with understanding or with hostility. Each new generation would need to choose between creating enemies or creating friends. The story of the 3 unusual children provided a clear example of what could happen when the wrong choices were made. But the story was more than just a lesson or a warning. It was also a tragedy. It was the story of 3 beings who never asked to be born into their strange forms, who never chose their terrible destinies, who were feared and hated for things they had not yet done. It asked those who heard it to feel compassion even for those who seemed monstrous. It asked them to consider whether the monsters were born or made. This question had no easy answer. Surely Fenrir's nature as a great wolf would have made him dangerous even with the best care. Surely Jormungandra's endless growth would have caused problems eventually. Surely Hel's division between life and death would have always set her apart. But would they have become the destroyers of the world if the gods had treated them differently? The story left this question open for each listener to answer in their own way. As the new world continued to develop, the circumstances that had created the tragedy of Loki's children became harder to imagine. The survivors had built a world where prophecy held less power. They had created a society where difference was less feared. They had established customs where even the strange were given a chance to prove themselves. In this new world, perhaps 3 unusual children could have been raised without fear, could have been helped to control their natures, could have been loved despite their strangeness. But then again, perhaps every generation believed they would do better than the last. And perhaps every generation faced their own version of the same challenges. Perhaps somewhere in the new world, there were children who were feared for being different. Perhaps there were beings who were imprisoned because others worried about what they might become. Perhaps the lessons of the old story were still relevant, because the same mistakes were still being made. This possibility meant the story remained important. It needed to continue being told. It needed to be remembered. Each time it was told, it created an opportunity for someone to recognize themselves in it. Perhaps they saw themselves in the gods, letting fear guide their actions. Perhaps they saw themselves in the children, being judged unfairly. Perhaps they saw themselves in Tyr, trying to show kindness despite the general atmosphere of fear. Whoever they saw themselves as, the story gave them a chance to think about their choices. And so, the story lived on. It was told around fires on cold nights. It was performed by traveling storytellers in village squares. It was written in books that were preserved in great libraries. It was painted on walls and carved into stone. It was sung in songs and chanted in poems. The story of how the world ended and began again. And the 3 unusual children who helped bring about that ending became immortal, even though those it described were not. In the telling and retelling, certain images became iconic. The image of Hel with her divided face, one side beautiful and one side dead, became a symbol of duality and balance. The image of Jormungandr circling the world with his tail in his mouth became a symbol of eternity and cycle. The image of Fenrir, with his jaws spanning from earth to sky, became a symbol of unstoppable force and righteous rage. These images carried meaning beyond the original story. People used these images to think about their own lives. When they felt divided between two paths, they thought of hell. When they felt caught in cycles they could not escape, they thought of Jormungandr. When they felt bound and betrayed, they thought of Fenrir. The three children became more than characters in a story. They became archetypes, universal symbols that spoke to deep human experiences. This transformation from specific individuals to universal symbols was perhaps the final chapter in the story of Loki's children. They had begun as three unusual beings born in an iron cave. They had become threats that the gods feared and imprisoned. They had turned into instruments of destruction that brought down the old world. And finally, they had become eternal symbols in the mythology of the new world. Their journey was complete. The new world, meanwhile, continued to spin through the cosmos. The new sun rose and set. The new moon waxed and waned. Seasons followed their proper order. Life flourished in countless forms. The world was green and growing, full of promise and possibility. It was a testament to the cycle of death and rebirth, destruction and creation, ending and beginning. The humans who populated this new world built their homes and raised their families. They developed new technologies and discovered new knowledge. They created art and music. They formed communities and governments. They made the same mistakes their ancestors had made, but they also made new and different mistakes. They learned and grew and changed. This was the nature of life, continuing forward even after the greatest catastrophe imaginable. Among these humans were those who felt a special connection to the old stories. They felt drawn to the tales of gods and giants, of monsters and heroes, of the world that was, and the world that came after. They became the keepers of these stories, the ones who made sure they were not forgotten. They understood that memory was important, that the past had lessons to teach the present. These storytellers would gather audiences and begin their tale. They would speak of a time long ago, before the world took its current shape. They would describe Loki, the trickster god, and Angrboda, the giantess who knew terrible secrets. They would tell of three children born from that union, each stranger than the last, and their audiences would listen with wonder and sometimes with fear, imagining what it must have been like to live in such a time. The storytellers would describe hell, divided down the middle between life and death. They would speak of how she walked with one foot in each world, never fully belonging to either. They would tell of her journey to the underworld, where she became a queen and a judge. They would explain how she received all those who died quietly, giving them rest and peace. And the audiences would understand that death, though frightening, was not necessarily cruel. Then the storytellers would turn to Jormungandr, the serpent who never stopped growing. They would describe how he was cast into the ocean, where he grew so large that he encircled the entire world. They would speak of sailors who glimpsed his coils rising from the depths. They would tell of Thor's attempts to catch him, and how the serpent always proved too mighty, even for the thunder god. And the audiences would marvel at the idea of something so vast, so beyond normal comprehension. Finally, the storytellers would come to Fenrir, and their voices would drop to speak of the Great Wolf. They would tell of how he was raised in Asgard, how he grew too large and too dangerous. They would describe the chains that were made to bind him, and how he broke them one by one. They would speak of Tyr's sacrifice, placing his hand in the wolf's mouth as a pledge that was broken, and the audiences would feel the tragedy of it. A creature who might have been noble becoming a monster through betrayal. The storytellers would then build to the climax, describing the Fimbulwinter and the earthquakes and the darkening of the sun and moon. They would tell of how all three children broke free, or emerged from their places. They would describe the great battle on Vigrid Plain, with gods and giants clashing in their final conflict. They would speak of Fenrir swallowing Odin, of Jormungandr fighting Thor, of Hel leading an army of the dead. And the audiences would sit breathless, caught up in the drama. Then would come the fire, Surtur's flame consuming everything. The storytellers would describe how the 9 worlds burned, how even the realm of the dead was destroyed, how everything returned to void and darkness. They would let the silence stretch, allowing their audiences to feel the weight of absolute ending. Some listeners would shift uncomfortably. Children would move closer to their parents. Everyone would wait to hear what came next. And then, the storytellers would speak of rebirth. They would describe the new earth rising from the sea, green and beautiful. They would tell of life and Lithrasir, emerging from their hiding place to repopulate the world. They would speak of the surviving gods gathering to tell stories and remember what had been. They would explain how the new world learned from the mistakes of the old. And the audiences would breathe out in relief, glad that the story did not end in pure darkness. The storytellers would conclude by speaking of what the tale meant. They would point out the lessons about fear and trust, about prophecy and choice, about treating others with dignity regardless of how strange they seemed. They would invite their audiences to think about how these lessons applied to their own lives. They would remind everyone that stories from the past could guide actions in the present. And then, they would fall silent, allowing the story to settle into the hearts and minds of those who had heard it. This pattern repeated countless times across the New World. In every village and city, in every generation, the story was told. It was adapted to fit different cultures and different contexts, but the core remained. 3 unusual children, fear and imprisonment, inevitable revenge, destruction and rebirth. The story was too powerful, too important, to be lost. In some places, the story took on religious significance. People built shrines to the memory of the old god. They made offerings in remembrance of those who had died in the final battle. They held ceremonies on certain days to honor the ending of the old world and the beginning of the new. Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir were sometimes included in these observances, remembered as necessary agents of change rather than simply as monsters. In other places, the story was treated as pure mythology, something to be studied and analyzed but not worshipped. Scholars wrote lengthy commentaries on every detail. They debated the meaning of each element. They compared different versions of the tale and tried to determine which was most authentic. They created elaborate theories about what the story represented on a symbolic or psychological level. The 3 children became subjects of academic inquiry. Artists across the New World found endless inspiration in the tale. Painters created images of Hel's divided face, trying to capture the strangeness of her dual nature. Sculptors carved representations of Jormungandr, his coils wrapping around pillars and buildings. Poets wrote verses about Fenrir's rage and Tyr's sacrifice. Musicians composed pieces meant to evoke the chaos of the final battle, or the peace of the world that came after. Each artistic interpretation added something new to the understanding of the story. A painter might emphasize the sadness in Hel's living eye, suggesting her loneliness. A sculptor might show Jormungandr in a moment of rest, making him seem almost peaceful despite his size. A poet might imagine Fenrir's thoughts during his years of imprisonment, giving voice to his suffering. These interpretations help people connect emotionally with beings who might otherwise seem too strange or distant to understand. As centuries passed, the story began to spread beyond the lands where it originated. Travelers carried it to distant regions. Merchants shared it in foreign markets. Conquerors brought it to the lands they invaded, and sometimes those lands adapted it to their own traditions. The tale of Loki's 3 children became known across vast portions of the New World, taking on new forms while maintaining its essential elements. In some distant lands, the story merged with local myth. Hel became associated with other death deities. Jormungandr was compared to local serpent legend. Fenrir was connected to tales of great beasts and monsters. These syncretistic versions of the story showed how myths could travel and transform while still carrying their original meanings. The specific names might change, but the themes of fear, betrayal, and inevitable consequence remain. Children growing up in the New World heard the story so often that its characters became part of their imaginative landscape. They played games where some pretended to be gods, and others pretended to be the children of Loki. They drew pictures of Fenrir and Jormungandr. They made up new adventures for Hel in her dark kingdom. In this way, the story remained alive and dynamic, constantly being reimagined and reinvented by each new generation. Some children identified strongly with one or another of the 3 unusual children. A child who felt divided between 2 parts of their identity might feel kinship with Hel. A child who felt they were growing too fast or changing too much might relate to Jormungandr. A child who felt unfairly judged or restricted might see themselves in Fenrir. These identifications could be powerful, helping young people make sense of their own experiences through the lens of myth. Parents and teachers used the story to convey important lessons. They would tell children about Fenrir to warn them about the consequences of broken trust. They would speak of Jormungandr to illustrate how small problems could grow if not addressed. They would reference hell to help children understand death and loss. The story became a tool for education, a way to discuss difficult topics through the safety of narrative distance. But the story also contained warnings for the adults. It reminded them not to let fear guide their decisions when dealing with children or anyone who seemed different. It cautioned against creating self-fulfilling prophecies by treating people as if they were already guilty of crimes they had not committed. It showed how actions taken with good intentions could lead to terrible outcomes. Adults who thought carefully about the story might question their own prejudices and fears. As the new world matured and developed its own long history, the story of the old world and Loki's children became more distant. It was ancient history now, so far in the past that it seemed almost like a dream. Fewer people believed it had truly happened. More people treated it as a beautiful and meaningful myth, but not as literal truth. The shift from history to mythology was gradual but inevitable. Yet even as belief in the literal truth of the story faded, its power remained. Perhaps it was even stronger as acknowledged fiction than it had been as supposed fact. When people understood they were engaging with a story rather than a historical account, they felt freer to interpret it personally. They could extract the meanings most relevant to their own lives without worrying about historical accuracy. The story became more flexible, more universal, more timeless. In this form, as acknowledged mythology, the tale of Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir could speak to anyone, anywhere, at any time. It was no longer confined to the specific context of the old world and its god. It became a story about family and difference, about fear and its consequences, about fate and free will, about destruction and renewal. These themes were universal. Every culture and every era had to grapple with them. The story taught that difference should not automatically be feared. This lesson was needed in every generation, as people always seemed ready to fear those who were unlike themselves. Whether the difference was in appearance, in ability, in belief, or in nature, the instinct to reject or destroy what was different remained strong. The story of how the gods' fear created their own destruction served as a powerful counter to this instinct. The story also taught about the nature of prophecy and destiny. The gods had known what Loki's children would do, and in trying to prevent it, they had ensured it came to pass. This paradox raised important questions. Was the future fixed or changeable? Did knowing the future mean you could change it? Or did it mean you would inevitably bring it about through your attempts to avoid it? Different people answered these questions differently, but the story forced them to think about the questions themselves. Additionally, the story explored the relationship between nature and nurture. Were Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir born as destroyers, or were they made into destroyers by how they were treated? The story seemed to suggest both were true. The children had natures that made them potentially dangerous, but the way the gods responded to that potential turned possibility into certainty. This ambiguity made the story richer and more thought-provoking. The tale also spoke to the theme of revenge and justice. When Fenrir broke free and hunted the gods, was he seeking justice for his imprisonment or simple revenge for his suffering? When Hel led an army of the dead against the living, was she fulfilling her role as a goddess of death or expressing anger at being cast into darkness? The story did not provide clear answers, allowing each listener to form their own opinion about the morality of the children's action. Furthermore, the story examined the cost of betrayal. Tyr's loss of his hand was the physical symbol of the broken trust between gods and wolves. That single act of betrayal, placing his hand in Fenrir's mouth with the intention to deceive, set in motion a chain of events that contributed to the ending of the world. It showed that betrayal was never a small thing, never without consequence. Trust, once broken, could rarely be fully repaired. The story also offered hope through its ending. After the complete destruction of everything, something new emerged. The world was reborn. Life continued, but this taught that endings were not final, that after even the greatest catastrophe, renewal was possible. It suggested that destruction could be necessary for growth, that sometimes things needed to end completely before something better could begin. This was a comforting message for people facing personal or collective crises. As more time passed, and the new world developed advanced ways of sharing stories, the tale of Loki's children spread even further. It was written down in books that could be copied and distributed widely. It was performed in great theaters before huge audiences. Eventually, it was adapted into new forms of storytelling that the old world could never have imagined. But, regardless of the medium, the story remained essentially the same. The core images remained powerful across all versions and adaptations. Hel's divided face, showing life and death side by side. Jormungandr's endless coils, wrapping around the entire world. Fenrir's enormous jaws, spanning from earth to sky. These images were so striking, so memorable, that they persisted even among people who had never heard the full story. They became part of the visual language of the culture. People began using phrases from the story in everyday speech. When something grew too large to control, they said it was like Jormungandr. When someone felt torn between two options, they called it a hell's choice. When someone broke free from long restraint with explosive force, others said they were like Fenrir breaking his bonds. The story had entered the language itself, becoming part of how people expressed themselves. Philosophers found deep meaning in the story. They wrote treatises on the nature of fate, as illustrated by the tale. They debated whether the gods were morally justified in their treatment of the children. They discussed whether the ending of the old world was tragedy or necessity. They used the story as a framework for exploring fundamental questions about existence, morality, choice, and consequence. The three unusual children became philosophical concepts, as well as mythological figures. Religious thinkers also engaged with the story. Some saw in it a representation of cyclical time, with worlds endlessly being destroyed and reborn. Others interpreted it as a lesson about divine justice, or the consequences of pride. Some incorporated elements of the story into their own religious teachings. Others rejected it as incompatible with their beliefs, but still acknowledged its cultural importance. The story was flexible enough to be meaningful to people with very different worldviews. Scientists in the New World found their own ways to engage with the tale. Some saw Jormungandr as a metaphor for infinity, or for the interconnectedness of all things. Others interpreted the cycle of destruction and rebirth as representing actual processes in nature or the cosmos. Some dismissed the story as prescientific thinking, but admitted it contained psychological truths. Even in an age of reason and evidence, the ancient myth retained relevance. The story also influenced the development of ethics and law in the New World. The principle that you should not punish people for crimes they have not committed became fundamental to justice systems. The understanding that treating people as enemies would make them into enemies informed approaches to conflict resolution. The recognition that fear could be more dangerous than the things feared shaped policies and attitudes. The tale of Loki's children had practical effects on how society organized itself. In all these ways, across all these domains, the story continued to live and breathe long after the beings it described had passed into nothingness or transcendence, or whatever lay beyond the ending of the world. The tale had become immortal, eternal, constantly renewed through retelling and reinterpretation. It would outlive the New World, just as it had survived the destruction of the Old World. And perhaps this was the final gift of Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir to existence. They had played their part in the great cycle. They had been both victims and villains, innocents and monsters, children and destroyers. They had suffered and caused suffering. They had been bound and had broken free. They had ended one world and made space for another. And in doing all this, they had created a story so powerful, so resonant, so meaningful, that it would echo through eternity. Their lives had been difficult and painful. They had never asked to be born into such strange forms or to bear such terrible destinies. They had been separated from each other and from their mother, scattered across the 9 worlds because others feared what they might become. They had been judged guilty before they had committed any crimes. They had been imprisoned, exiled, and cast into darkness. And yet, from all that suffering, from all that injustice, had come a story that taught compassion and warned against fear. Perhaps if Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir could have known how their story would be remembered, they might have taken some comfort in it. They might have felt that their suffering had purpose beyond simply fulfilling prophecy. They might have understood that by playing their difficult roles, they had given something valuable to all who came after. They had become teachers, examples, warnings, and symbols. They had become immortal in the only way that truly matters, living on in the hearts and minds of countless beings who would never meet them, but would never forget them either. The night settled gently over the new world. Stars appeared in the sky, forming patterns that would one day be given names and meaning. The new moon rose, casting its soft light over the peaceful earth. In homes across the land, parents tucked their children into bed. Some of these parents told their children stories before sleep came. Sometimes they told the ancient tale of 3 unusual children and the world that ended and was born again. The children listened with wide eyes as they heard of Hel and Jormungandr and Fenrir. They heard of gods and giants, of binding and betrayal, of revenge and renewal. As sleep approached, the story wove itself into their dreams. They dreamed of divided goddesses and world-circling serpents and great wolves with golden eyes. They dreamed of fire and darkness and light returning. They dreamed of endings that were also beginnings. And in the morning, they would wake to a world that was still there, still green, still full of possibility. They would live their lives and eventually tell the story to their own children. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. Stories being told, lessons being learned, memories being preserved. Life going on, even after the end of everything, especially after the end of everything. This was how the tale of Loki's children lived on. Not in the physical forms of the beings themselves, which had been consumed by Surtur's fire. Not in the old world, which had fallen and been replaced. But in the telling and retelling, in the remembering and reimagining, in the lessons learned and applied. The story was their legacy, their gift, their immortality. And it was a good legacy. A meaningful legacy. A legacy that made the suffering of 3 unusual children matter, in a way that pure destruction never could. They had been born to end the world, but in doing so, they had given the new world something precious. They had given it a story that would never be forgotten, a lesson that would always be needed, a warning that remained forever relevant. As long as there were people to tell stories, the tale of Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir would be told. As long as there were those who feared difference, the warning of their story would be needed. As long as there was a world at all, the cycle they represented, ending and beginning, destruction and creation, death and rebirth, would continue to have meaning. And so, the story ends where it began, with telling and remembering. 3 unusual children were born in an iron cave long ago. They were scattered and imprisoned out of fear. They broke free and helped end the world. A new world was born from the ashes of the old, and the story of what happened was told again and again, echoing through eternity, never to be forgotten. The 3 children of Loki had found their peace, whatever form that peace took. The new world had learned its lessons, or at least had the opportunity to learn them. The cycle continued, as cycles do, and somewhere, in the space between sleeping and waking, between ending and beginning, between life and death, the story of 3 unusual children whispered itself to anyone who would listen, offering its wisdom to all who had ears to hear. Yet the story was not complete without understanding the small moments, the quiet times that filled the spaces between the great events. For most of their existence, the 3 children lived in isolation, each in their separate realm, and these long periods of solitude shaped them as much as the dramatic moments of their life. Hel spent countless ages in her underground kingdom. The work of receiving the dead was constant, but also repetitive. Each soul that arrived was unique, with their own story, their own life, their own manner of death. Yet they all needed the same thing, a place to rest, acceptance of their new state, guidance into whatever came after. Hel provided this service day after day, year after year, century after century. In the quiet moments between arrivals, Hel would walk through her vast realm. She would pass through halls built of memories and regrets. She would cross fields where pale flowers grew without sun. She would stand at the edge of her kingdom, looking out into the deeper darkness that lay beyond even her domain. In these moments, she would think about her nature, about being divided, about existing between two states. Sometimes Hel would try to remember her earliest days, before she was brought to this place. She would recall the iron cave where she was born. She would remember her mother's face, showing no reaction to her daughter's strange appearance. She would think of her brothers, the serpent and the wolf, and wonder what had become of them. The memories were distant and dreamlike, but they were all she had of a time when she was not alone. Hel wondered sometimes what it would have been like to grow up differently. What if the gods had not feared her? What if she had been allowed to stay in Asgard or to live in the mortal world? Would her divided nature have been less pronounced if she had been surrounded by life instead of death? Would she have learned to feel more, to care more, to be more than simply an efficient administrator of the deceased? But these thoughts were useless, and Hel knew it. She was what she was. Her nature was fixed. Her role was determined. She had a purpose, and she fulfilled it well. The dead under her care were treated fairly. They found rest and peace. Some even found a kind of happiness in her grey realm. She was good at what she did, even if what she did was lonely. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. Hel was surrounded by souls, thousands upon thousands of them. Yet she remained fundamentally alone. The dead could not truly connect with her. They were too focused on their own transitions, their own adjustments to no longer being alive. They did not see her as a person, but as a function, a force, a goddess of death. She was respected, and even feared, but she was not known. Occasionally, living beings would venture into her realm. Heroes on quests would descend into the underworld seeking something, wisdom, treasure, or a lost loved one. Hel would receive these visitors with cool politeness. She would listen to their requests, and sometimes grant them, sometimes refuse. These interactions broke the monotony of her existence, but they did not truly relieve her loneliness. The living visitors were always eager to leave, to return to the world of sun and warmth. None stayed to know her. Odin visited more than most. The Allfather would descend into Hel's kingdom, seeking knowledge from the dead. He would question those who had passed beyond life, learning secrets that only the deceased knew. Hel allowed these visits, though she did not enjoy them. Odin represented everything that had taken her from her family, and placed her in this dark realm. Yet she maintained her dignity in her role, receiving even him with the proper formality. During these visits, Odin would sometimes look at Hel with what might have been regret. Perhaps he wondered if he had made the right choice, sending this strange girl into the depths. Perhaps he questioned whether her nature truly required such isolation. But he never spoke of these thoughts, and Hel never asked. Their interactions remained formal and distant. The damage had been done long ago, and neither knew how to bridge the gap that had been created. In the deepest part of her realm, Hel kept a private chamber. This was her own space, where even the dead did not venture. Here she would retreat when the weight of her duties became too heavy. The chamber was simple and spare. There was little decoration, little comfort, but it was hers, and hers alone. In this space, she could drop the mask of the efficient death goddess and simply be herself, whatever that meant. Sometimes in this private chamber, Hel would allow her living side to cry. Tears would fall from her one living eye, running down the half of her face that still felt sensation. Her dead side remained dry and expressionless as always. This divided crying was perhaps a perfect expression of her nature, capable of feeling, yet incapable of fully expressing that feeling. Half alive, half dead, never wholly one or the other. Hel would think about her brothers during these private moments. She wondered if Jormungandr ever felt lonely in the vast ocean. She wondered if Fenrir ever missed the days when Tyr would visit him with kindness. She wondered if they remembered her, or if they had forgotten they even had a sister. The distance between them was not just physical but existential. They each inhabited their own isolated world, unable to reach across the void that separated them. Yet, in a strange way, their isolation united them. All three children of Loki had been separated and confined because of what they might become. All three lived in spaces that were vast yet limiting. Hel had an entire realm but could not leave it. Jormungandr had the whole ocean, but was trapped in his circling. Fenrir had been confined to an even smaller space. They were prisoners of fate, each serving their sentence until the day when they would all break free. Far above, Hel's dark kingdom. In the bright ocean waters, Jormungandr pursued his endless routine. The serpent swam and ate and grew. These three activities consumed his existence. He knew nothing else. His mind, such as it was, contained no memories of the past and no anticipation of the future. He existed purely in the present moment, an eternal now that stretched on without change. The ocean was Jormungandr's entire world. He knew every current and every depth. He had explored every trench and every reef. He had swum past every shore and every island. The geography of the water was mapped in his body and his instincts. When he felt the cold current from the north, his body knew to shift slightly south. When he sensed the warmth of shallow waters, he knew to dive deeper. He moved through his domain with perfect knowledge born of endless repetition. The serpent encountered many creatures in his travels through the ocean. Schools of fish would scatter at his approach, thousands of silver bodies fleeing in panic. Whales would sound deep when they sensed his presence, using their songs to warn others of their kind. Even great sharks, apex predators in their own right, would swim away rather than risk an encounter with the Midgard serpent. Jormungandr was the undisputed ruler of the ocean, though he barely noticed his own dominance. Sometimes Jormungandr would rise to the surface of the water. His head would break through the waves into the air above. For a moment, he would exist in both worlds, aquatic and aerial. He would see the sky, though he had no thoughts about what he saw. He would feel the wind, though it meant nothing to him. Then he would sink back down into the comfortable depths, where pressure and darkness were constant companions. The serpent's body had grown so immense that it affected the very nature of the ocean. When he moved quickly, currents shifted across entire seas. When he coiled tighter, water levels would change along distant coasts. When he breathed out, streams of bubbles would rise from the depths like underwater geysers. He was less like a creature living in the ocean, and more like a part of the ocean itself, an animate feature of the marine world. Jormungandra's hunger was constant and endless. He ate continuously, consuming vast quantities of sea life. Fish, whales, squid, anything that swam or crawled or drifted in the water became his food. His mouth was always open as he swam, filtering life from the water like a massive predatory net. Yet no matter how much he ate, the hunger never diminished. It was part of his nature, an appetite that could never be satisfied, only temporarily quieted. The serpent had no concept of time as other beings understood it. He did not count days or years. He did not mark seasons, though the ocean changed with them. He simply existed in a long, continuous moment that never truly varied. This day was like yesterday was like tomorrow would be. Swimming, eating, growing. Swimming, eating, growing. The pattern never changed, and Jormungandr had no desire for it to change. Yet somewhere deep in his ancient mind, buried beneath the simple drives of hunger and movement, there existed a small spark of something else. Not quite thought, not quite awareness, but something. Perhaps it was memory, a dim recollection of the iron cave and the giantess who had birthed him. Perhaps it was instinct, a knowledge written into his very being about what he would one day do. Perhaps it was simply the weight of fate, pressing down on him even in his thoughtless existence. This spark lay dormant for ages. It did not affect Jormungandra's daily existence. He swam and ate and grew regardless of its presence. But it was there, waiting. It would remain there until the day came when the world began to end. On that day, the spark would flare into something more. On that day, Jormungandr would become more than just a swimming, eating machine. On that day, he would fulfill the purpose for which he had been born. Until then, the serpent continued his endless circuit of the world. His tail remained firmly gripped in his mouth. His body formed a perfect circle around Midgard. He was the boundary between the known world and the great void beyond. He was the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, the symbol of eternity and endless cycles. He was both literal and symbolic, both creature and concept, both individual being and cosmic principle. Ships that sailed the outer reaches of the ocean would sometimes report seeing sections of Jormungandr. Sailors would describe coils rising from the water, like islands that moved. They would speak of scales larger than shields reflecting the sunlight. They would tell of eyes they glimpsed in the waves, eyes that seemed to look through them rather than at them. These sightings became part of maritime lore, warnings to those who would venture too far from safe harbors. Some sailors worshipped Jormungandr, though worship was perhaps too strong a word. They acknowledged his presence and power. They made offerings to the sea, hoping these would somehow appease the great serpent. They created rituals around sailing into waters where he was known to appear. Whether these practices had any effect on Jormungandr was unknown. The serpent noticed nothing beyond his endless hunger and his eternal swimming. On one occasion, a ship sailed directly over a section of Jormungandr's body. The crew did not realize what they were passing over. They thought they had entered a strange area where the water seemed unusually calm and the current flowed in an unexpected direction. They sailed onward, and only later, when looking back, did they see the massive coil rising behind them. They realized then that they had crossed over the Midgard serpent himself and survived. The tale of this crossing became famous, though others doubted its truth. Deep beneath the ocean surface, in trenches where no light ever reached, Jormungandra's body created its own ecosystem. Creatures that could not survive in normal waters clung to his scales. Strange fish swam in the currents created by his movement. Organisms that fed on the scraps of his meals followed in his wake. The serpent had become a mobile habitat, a traveling environment unto himself. He was not just in the ocean but had become a part of the ocean structure. As Jormungandr swam through the depths, as he pursued his endless circuit, as he maintained his grip on his own tail, the world above him changed. Kingdoms rose and fell. Heroes lived and died. Cultures developed and collapsed. The serpent noticed none of this. The affairs of the surface world meant nothing to him. He existed in a separate reality, one of water and darkness and eternal hunger. His world would not intersect with the world above until the day when all worlds would collide. Meanwhile, in his prison far from both the ocean and the underworld, Fenrir endured. The great wolf lay bound in the wilderness, unable to move, unable to close his mouth, unable to do anything but exist in constant discomfort. The sword between his jaws caused endless pain. The ribbon around his body prevented any relief. He could not sleep deeply. He could not stretch. He could not even howl properly. He could only lie there and suffer. The suffering would have broken most creatures. The endless discomfort, the inability to move, the constant pain from the sword in his mouth, all would have destroyed the spirit of lesser being. But Fenrir was not a lesser being. He was something more, something stronger, something capable of enduring what should not be endurable. His will was as strong as his body. His mind was as sharp as his teeth. He endured because he had no other choice, and because he knew that endurance would eventually be rewarded. Fenrir thought constantly during his imprisonment. Without the ability to move or act, his mind became his only activity. He thought about the past, replaying every moment of his life. He remembered being small and playing in his pen in Asgard. He remembered the gods watching him with wary eyes. He remembered Tyr bringing him food, speaking kindly, scratching behind his ears. These memories were bitter now, tainted by what had come after, but they were all he had. The wolf thought about the betrayal in excruciating detail. He remembered the moment when the gods approached with Gleipnir. He remembered how the ribbon looked so harmless, so weak. He remembered his suspicion and his demand for a pledge. He remembered Tyr stepping forward, placing his hand in his mouth, meeting his eyes with that sad expression. He remembered the feel of the ribbon being tied around him, and then the terrible realization that it would not break. Fenrir thought about that moment when he bit down on Tyr's hand. He remembered the taste of blood. He remembered the feel of bone breaking. He remembered Tyr's face, showing pain but also acceptance, as if the god had known this would happen. The wolf felt no regret for taking Tyr's hand. It had been the only response possible to such betrayal, yet he also felt a strange sorrow. Tyr had been the one god who had shown him kindness. That kindness had been false, used to lure him into a trap, but perhaps a part of it had been real. Perhaps Tyr had truly cared, and that made his betrayal even worse. The wolf thought about his siblings, his sister and brother whom he barely remembered. He wondered what had happened to them. Were they also imprisoned somewhere? Were they also suffering? Or had they found places in the world where they could exist peacefully? Fenrir had no way of knowing, and this ignorance added to his isolation. He was alone with his thoughts, with no one to share them, no way to connect with others of his kind. Fenrir thought about his mother, Angerboda, the giantess who had raised him in the Iron Cave. She had known what he would become. She had seen his fate in her vision. Yet she had loved him anyway, or at least she had cared for him. He remembered her rough hands stroking his fur. He remembered her voice, speaking words he could no longer recall. He wondered if she ever thought of him, or if she had moved on to other concerns, other visions, other dark knowledge. Most of all, Fenrir thought about revenge. This thought was not loud or violent in his mind. It was quiet and constant. A steady determination that never wavered. He would be free one day. The prophecies promised it. When the world began to end, his bonds would break. And when that happened, he would have his revenge on those who had imprisoned him. He would especially have his revenge on Odin, the Allfather, who had ordered his binding. These thoughts sustained him through the endless days and nights of his imprisonment. The wolf learned patience during his captivity. He'd always been a predator, and predators understand patience. They wait for the right moment to strike. They endure discomfort to achieve their goals. Fenrir applied this hunting patience to his situation. He was waiting for his moment. He was enduring his discomfort. And when the time came, he would strike with all the accumulated rage and power of his long captivity. The gods had thought they could neutralize him by binding him. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous. A patient, thoughtful enemy with unlimited time to plan their downfall. During the long years, few beings came near Fenrir's prison. The gods had chosen his location specifically for its remoteness. It was far from Asgard, far from any settlement, far from anywhere that travelers might pass. The land around him was desolate and harsh. Nothing grew there. No animals made their homes there. It was a dead place, suitable for holding a creature associated with destruction. But occasionally, someone would come. Sometimes it was gods, checking to ensure his bonds still held. They would approach cautiously, staying well back, ready to flee if the ribbon showed any sign of breaking. They would observe the wolf lying there, the sword in his mouth, foam running like a river. They would nod to each other with satisfaction, congratulating themselves on their successful imprisonment. Then they would leave, never meeting Fenrir's eyes, never acknowledging him as a thinking, feeling being. To them, he was simply a threat that had been neutralized. Other times, the visitors were not gods, but giants, or other beings who had heard of the great wolf and came out of curiosity. These visitors were braver than the gods in some ways. They would approach closer. Some would even speak to Fenrir, though he could not respond with the sword holding his mouth open. They would comment on his size, his strength, the injustice of his imprisonment. Some expressed sympathy, others expressed fear. A few promised they would free him if they could, though none ever tried. Fenrir listened to all of them with his sharp ears, his golden eyes watching, his mind absorbing every word. Loki visited his son more than anyone else, though still not often enough to provide real comfort. The trickster god would stand at the edge of the clearing where Fenrir lay bound. He would look at his son with an expression that mixed many emotions: guilt, anger, sadness, and a strange sort of pride. Loki would sometimes speak, telling Fenrir news of the world, sharing his own frustrations with the gods. But he never freed his son. He claimed he could not risk bringing down the full wrath of Asgard on himself. Fenrir did not fully believe this excuse. He suspected his father was afraid, or perhaps was waiting for the right moment, or perhaps simply did not care enough. The visits became more painful than comforting, reminders of a family connection that seemed hollow and full. The natural world around Fenrir's prison changed with the seasons, though the changes were subtle in that harsh land. Winter brought deeper cold and heavier snow. Summer brought slightly warmer air and the brief appearance of a few hardy plants. Spring and autumn were barely distinguishable, just transitions between the two main seasons. Fenrir experienced all these changes from his immobile position. Snow piled on his body in winter. Rain soaked his fur in spring. Sun beat down on him in summer. Wind dried him in autumn. He was exposed to all of nature's moods, with no shelter, no relief. Birds sometimes landed on Fenrir's body, mistaking him for a strange hill or rock formation. They would peck at insects that had made homes in his fur. They would rest on his broad back before continuing their journey. The wolf could feel their tiny feet, their light weight, their small movements. They were free in a way he could never be, able to fly wherever they wished, able to come and go as they pleased. He envied these small creatures, even as he knew that one of his teeth was larger than their entire bodies. The weather sometimes turned severe in Fenrir's prison. Storms would roll across the desolate landscape, bringing lightning and thunder. The wolf would lie there, as the rain poured down, as the wind howled, as lightning struck the ground nearby. He could not seek shelter. He could not even flinch away from the lightning. He simply had to endure whatever nature brought, adding weather's violence to the violence already being done to him by his bonds. During one particularly fierce storm, lightning struck very close to where Fenrir lay. The bolt hit a large rock nearby, splitting it in two with a tremendous crack. The wolf felt the heat of the lightning, smelled the sharp scent of burned stone. For a moment he thought perhaps the lightning would strike him. Perhaps it would kill him and end his suffering. But the storm passed, and he remained alive, still bound, still suffering. Even death would not release him until the time was right. As years turned into decades and decades into centuries, Fenrir's body changed in subtle ways. His muscles, unable to move, should have atrophied, but something about his nature prevented this. He remained strong despite his immobility. Perhaps it was magic. Perhaps it was simply that he was more than a normal wolf. That the rules of ordinary flesh did not fully apply to him. His body waited, just as his mind waited, preserving its strength for the day when it would finally be needed. The wolf's mind grew sharper during his captivity. With nothing to do but think, he developed his intelligence in ways that might not have happened if he had remained free. He thought through complex ideas. He considered philosophical questions. He developed theories about the nature of fate and free will, about justice and revenge, about the relationship between gods and those they feared. Fenrir became, in his way, a philosopher, though his philosophy was shaped entirely by his experience of suffering and betrayal. He thought deeply about the nature of trust. It was trust that had allowed the gods to bind him. He had trusted that Tyr's pledge meant something. He had trusted that the ribbon was as harmless as it appeared. He had trusted that if he proved his strength by breaking chains, the gods would respect him rather than fear him more. All of this trust had been betrayed. From this experience, Fenrir developed an understanding that trust was both essential and dangerous. It was necessary for any relationship, but it created vulnerability that others could exploit. The wolf also thought about the nature of destiny. He knew the prophecies about himself. He knew he was fated to swallow Odin during Ragnarok. He knew his bonds would break when the world began to end. He knew his role in the great pattern of fate. But he wondered about the space between now and then. Was everything determined, or did he have some choice in how he spent these years of imprisonment? He decided that even in his bound state, he had choices. He could choose to think or to stagnate. He could choose to maintain his strength or to let himself weaken. He could choose bitterness or acceptance. These were small choices, but they were his. Fenrir chose bitterness and revenge. He chose to maintain his strength. He chose to think and plan. These choices defined his captivity. They transformed him from a victim into a threat, from a bound beast into a patient hunter waiting for his moment. The gods had tried to neutralize him, but they had only given him time to become more dangerous than he had ever been when he was free. Time continued its slow march. The world spun through space. The seasons changed. The sun rose and set. The moon waxed and waned. Through all of this, 3 unusual children remained in their separate places. Hel, in her underworld kingdom, Jormungandr in his ocean circuit, Fenrir in his wilderness prison, each isolated, each alone, each waiting for a day that seemed like it might never come but that they knew somehow absolutely would. The gods in Asgard tried to forget about Loki's children. They tried to go about their lives as if the threat had been fully contained. They held their feasts in their golden halls. They competed in tests of strength and skill. They dealt with the problems that arose in their rule over the 9 worlds. They tried to be happy, tried to enjoy their immortality, tried to live as if the shadow of prophecy did not hang over everything they did. But they could not fully forget. Odin, especially, could not forget. The All-Father carried the knowledge of what was to come like a physical weight. He knew that no matter what precautions he took, no matter how many warriors he gathered, no matter how much wisdom he acquired, the ending would still come. The children he had scattered and imprisoned would break free. The battle would be fought. The gods would fall. This knowledge haunted him, made every victory hollow, made every feast bittersweet. Odin sometimes wondered if he had made the right choices regarding Loki's children. Perhaps if he had killed them as infants, the prophecy could have been prevented. But Asgard was a sacred place, and spilling blood there would have defiled it. Perhaps if he had befriended them, treated them with kindness and respect, they might have become allies instead of enemies. But the prophecies had been so clear about the threat they represented. Perhaps if he had done nothing, simply watched and waited, things might have turned out differently. But doing nothing when faced with such danger had seemed impossible. These thoughts circled in Odin's mind like birds circling prey. He could never settle on a satisfactory answer. Perhaps there had been no right choice, only different wrong choices. Perhaps the outcome was fixed from the beginning, and nothing he could have done would have changed it. Perhaps his attempts to avoid the prophecy had been the very actions that brought it about, a classic trap of fate. He would never know for certain, and that uncertainty was its own form of torture. Thor, the thunder god, thought less about these matters than his father did. Thor was a being of action rather than contemplation. He focused on the present rather than worrying about a future he could not control. He traveled through the 9 worlds, fighting giants, protecting settlements, making himself useful. When he thought about Jormungandr, it was not with philosophical worry, but with eager anticipation. He looked forward to their final battle. He was confident he would win, despite what the prophecies said. Thor's confidence was both his strength and his potential downfall. Tyr, the one-handed god, carried his own burden of guilt. He had been the one to place his hand in Fenrir's mouth. He had been the one to make the pledge that was broken. He had sacrificed his hand to complete the binding, and sometimes he wondered if he had also sacrificed his honor. He tried to tell himself that he had done what was necessary, that the safety of all the gods had depended on Fenrir being bound. But in his quieter moments, he remembered the wolf's eyes looking at him with trust, and he felt shame. The other gods dealt with the situation in their own ways. Some tried to ignore it entirely. Some threw themselves into their duties and pleasures to avoid thinking about it. Some studied the prophecies obsessively, looking for loopholes or alternative interpretations. Some prayed to forces, even greater than themselves, seeking intervention that might change the fated course. But nothing changed. The prophecies remained the same. The children remained in their places. The ending drew slowly closer, inevitable as the turning of the season. In the human world of Midgard, life continued without much knowledge of the divine drama playing out in the higher realms. Humans lived their short lives, loving and fighting, building and destroying, creating and losing. They had their own problems to worry about. Crops failing, battles with neighboring tribes, sicknesses that had no cure, the everyday struggles of survival. They worshipped the gods and told stories about them, but they did not truly understand the weight of fate that the gods carried. Some humans knew more than others. There were seers and wise women who could glimpse the future. There were skalds and poets who preserved the old stories and prophecy. These special individuals understood that something great and terrible was approaching. They spoke of it in veiled terms, in metaphors and symbols. They warned that the world would not last forever, that there would come a day when everything would change. But most people dismiss these warnings as the ravings of mystics, too focused on their immediate concerns to worry about distant apocalypses. The world tree, Yggdrasil, stood at the center of all the 9 worlds, connecting them, supporting them, giving them structure. The great tree had existed since the beginning of time, and most assumed it would exist forever. Its roots reached down into the underworld where hell ruled. Its branches reached up into the heavens where the gods dwelt. Its trunk passed through the mortal world of Midgard. Everything was connected through this cosmic tree. But even Yggdrasil was not immune to decay. 3 enormous roots supported the world tree. One was being gnawed constantly by a dragon named Nidhogg, who lived in the depth. Another was suffering from rot, caused by the springs that flowed around it. The third was being eaten by countless deer and stags who fed on its bark and leaves. Slowly, imperceptibly, the world tree was weakening. The foundation of existence itself was being compromised. This decay was another sign that the ending was approaching, though few recognized it as such. The Norns, the 3 ancient beings who wove the threads of fate, continued their eternal work. They sat by the well at the base of Yggdrasil, spinning and weaving and cutting the threads that represented every life, every event, every moment. They knew everything that had been and everything that would be. They saw the pattern whole and complete. They knew the part that Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir would play. They knew how the story would end. But they did not intervene. They simply wove what must be woven, maintaining their mysterious role in the cosmic order. One Norn represented the past, one the present, and one the future. The Norn of the past held all memory, all history, all that had already occurred. The Norn of the present wove the threads of what was happening now, the ever-moving moment of existence. The Norn of the future held all possibility, all prophecy, all that was yet to come. Together they maintained the flow of time itself. Without them, cause would not lead to effect. Without them, destiny would have no meaning. They were as necessary to existence as the world tree itself. Sometimes the gods would visit the Norns, seeking knowledge about the future. The Norns would answer some questions and refuse to answer others. They operated by their own rules, sharing what they felt should be shared and withholding what should remain hidden. When asked about the final battle, about Ragnarok, they would confirm what the gods already knew, but would not provide details that might help avoid it. The ending was woven into the fabric of fate itself. It could not be unraveled without unraveling everything. Angrboda, the mother of the 3 unusual children, remained in her iron cave in the land of the giant. She lived alone, as she always had, practicing her dark magic and watching the patterns of fate. She had not seen her children since the gods had taken them away. She knew where each of them was. She knew what they were experiencing. Her visions showed her Hel's loneliness, Jormungandr's endless circling, Fenrir's painful imprisonment. But she did not visit them. Perhaps she felt it would be too painful. Perhaps she believed it would change nothing. Perhaps she was simply respecting the pattern that had been set in motion. The giantess spent her days in her cave, surrounded by items of power and knowledge. Runes carved into the iron wall. Bones that could be cast to read the future. Herbs that grew in darkness. Stones that whispered secret. She had accumulated vast knowledge over her long life. But that knowledge had not brought her happiness or peace. She knew too much about what was coming. She understood the role her children would play in the ending of all things. This knowledge was a burden she carried alone. Angrboda sometimes thought about Loki, the father of her children. Their relationship had been complicated, based more on mutual understanding of darkness than on love. Loki had been drawn to her knowledge and her power. She had been drawn to his potential for chaos. Together, they had created 3 beings who embodied destruction and transformation. Whether they had meant to do this, or whether fate had worked through them was unclear. Perhaps it did not matter. The result was the same regardless of intention. The giantess had long ago accepted that her children would bring about the end of the world. She had seen it in her visions before they were even born. She could have prevented their births, could have used magic or herbs to stop them from coming into existence, but she had not. Whether this was because she believed fate could not be changed, or because she wanted to see the gods brought down, or because she simply wanted children, despite knowing what they would become. She never revealed. Her motivations remained her own secret. In the darkest part of her cave, Angrboda kept 3 objects: a lock of pale hair from Hel's living side, a scale from Jormungandr's body, taken when he was still small enough to hold, a tuft of soft fur from Fenrir's puppy days. These were her only physical reminders of her children. She would sometimes take them out and hold them, remembering the brief time when she had them all together. Then, she would put them away and return to her studies and her visions, waiting for the day when everything would end and perhaps begin again. The land of the giants, Jotunheim, was a harsh and cold realm. Mountains rose impossibly high. Glaciers covered vast stretches of land. Winter never truly ended, though there were periods when it was less severe. The giants who lived there were as hard and cold as their environment. They had no love for the gods of Asgard, who had killed many of their kind and treated them as enemies. The giants waited for their chance at revenge, and they knew that chance would come during Ragnarok. The giants told their own stories about Loki's children. They spoke of Hel as a princess of their people, unjustly exiled by the gods. They described Jormungandr as a mighty guardian, thrown into the ocean but surviving and growing strong. They praised Fenrir as a hero, betrayed and bound but unbroken in spirit. In the giants' version of the stories, the 3 children were not monsters, but victims of godly fear and prejudice. This interpretation spread through Jotunheim, building sympathy and support for the children of Angrboda. When the end times would come, the giants would march alongside Loki's children. They would attack Asgard together. They would fight side by side against the gods who had oppressed them both. The giants looked forward to this day, even knowing that they too would likely perish in the final battle. They preferred destruction to continued subjugation. They would rather see all the worlds burn than continue living under the rule of the Aesir gods. The dwarves, living in their underground halls in Svartalfheim, had a different perspective. They were the ones who had created Gleipnir, the ribbon that bound Fenrir. They had crafted it from impossible things, using all their skill and magic. They were proud of their work, proud that it had accomplished what chains of iron and steel could not. But some dwarves felt unease about what they had done. They had helped bind an innocent creature based only on what it might do in the future. Was this justice? Was this right? The debate continued in their deep halls, with no clear resolution. The dwarves knew that Gleipnir would break eventually. They had built it strong, but they had also known it was meant to hold Fenrir only until the appointed time. When that time came, when the world began to end, the magic in the ribbon would fail. It was designed that way, woven into its very structure. The dwarves had created something that was both unbreakable and temporary, a paradox that reflected the paradoxical nature of fate itself. Light elves in Alfheim and dark elves in Svartalfheim had their own relationship with the prophecies of Ragnarok. The light elves, who lived in beauty and brightness, hoped the prophecies were wrong. They hoped the world would continue in peace and order. They did not want to see everything they had built destroyed. The dark elves, who lived in shadow and secret, were more accepting of the idea of destruction. They understood that endings were necessary for new beginning. They did not fear the coming apocalypse as much as they were curious about what would come after. All these different peoples and beings, living in their separate realms, connected by the world tree, going about their lives, were part of a vast tapestry of existence. Each thread in this tapestry had its place. Each color and texture contributed to the overall pattern, and woven throughout this tapestry were 3 special threads, one half bright and half dark, one that circled endlessly, one that was bound but not broken. These were the threads representing Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir. They seemed separate from the main pattern, isolated, but in truth they were essential to it. When their threads pulled free, when they finally moved into their destined positions, the entire tapestry would unravel, allowing a new one to be woven in its place. The world continued its slow approach toward the moment of ending. The signs accumulated gradually. Winters grew longer, summers grew shorter, the sun's light seemed dimmer, the moon's path seemed unstable. Stars occasionally fell from the sky. Earthquakes became more common. Strange creatures were seen in places they had never appeared before. These were small changes, easily dismissed individually, but together they formed a pattern. Those who paid attention could see that something was approaching, something vast and unstoppable. The gods increased their preparations. More warriors were brought to Valhalla. More weapons were forged. More defensive fortifications were built around Asgard. Odin spent more time consulting with the wise, seeking any lost scrap of knowledge that might help when the time came. Thor practiced with his hammer until his already formidable skill became even greater. All the gods prepared in their own ways for the battle they knew was coming, even as they tried to maintain the appearance that everything was normal, that their world would last forever. But beneath all this preparation, beneath all this activity, there was a current of resignation. The gods knew how the prophecies read. They knew the outcome had already been determined. They were going through the motions of preparation more out of pride and duty than out of any real belief that it would change the outcome. They would fight because they were gods and fighting was what they did. They would resist because giving up without resistance was unthinkable. But they would fall, as it had been written, as it had always been going to be. In her realm, Hel continued to receive the dead, one after another, building her silent kingdom. In the ocean, Jormungandr continued to swim his endless circuit, his tail still in his mouth, his hunger never satisfied. In the wilderness, Fenrir continued to lie bound, his rage building with each passing moment, his patience holding but his desire for revenge growing stronger. 3 children in 3 separate places, all waiting for the same moment, all bound by the same fate, all moving toward the same inevitable conclusion. The story of their lives, from birth to binding to breaking free, was already written in the fabric of fate. The Norns had woven it. The prophecies had proclaimed it. The signs were accumulating. The time was drawing near. Everything that had been set in motion at their birth was now approaching its culmination. The 3 unusual children of Loki and Angrboda would fulfill their purpose. They would bring down the old order. They would clear the way for something new. This was their role, their function, their terrible and necessary gift to existence. And when the time finally came, when the Fimbulwinter arrived, and the chains broke, and the serpent released his tail, when all 3 children moved into action, along with all the other forces of chaos and destruction, it would seem like catastrophe. It would seem like the end of everything good and ordered. It would seem like pure loss. But perhaps it was also liberation. Liberation for the 3 children from their prisons and isolation. Liberation of the world from a system that had grown old and stale. Liberation from the tyranny of an ending endlessly postponed, finally allowed to arrive and complete itself, so that something new could begin. This was the deeper truth beneath the surface story. The 3 children were not simply monsters or villains. They were agents of necessary change. They were the force that would break a world that needed to be broken. They were destruction in service of creation, death in service of rebirth, ending in service of beginning. Understanding this did not make their story less tragic, but it gave their tragedy meaning and purpose. They suffered so that the world could be renewed. They were sacrificed, and they sacrificed others so that the great cycle could continue. This was the role fate had given them, and they would fulfill it completely.